Welcome to MySecurityTV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with MySecurity Media, and today we're looking at some quite innovative research and new products coming out for the security sector from Australian universities. First up, going over to Adelaide and telling a complex tale. Researchers develop a narrative visualisation tool for crime fighters. This has applications in defence, security, federal police in their crime investigations and court presentations as well. So we're going to be joined by Dr James Walsh, Research Fellow with the Australian Research Centre for Interactive and Virtual Environments. Now we can tell a complex tale, and we're going to be joined by Dr James Walsh, Research Fellow from the Australian Research Centre for Interactive and Virtual Environments. This is how they get their funds. They come up with these awesome centre names. James, thanks for joining us.
No worries, thanks for having me.
Researchers develop a narrative visualisation tool for crime fighters, and I've done some large investigations in my time, so this sounds quite interesting. Introduce us to what you've been developing there at the University of South Australia.
So basically the project came out of a cooperative research centre called Data to Decisions, and basically they were given to look at big data problems within Australia. Their specific focus ended up being on basically national security, defence and policing, which is where we came into it. Obviously with modern case management systems, with Internet of Things, with all the sensors and investigative work that's going on, we're just getting more and more information that's getting put into these systems. And the problem is, how do we understand that? How do we communicate that? And how do we identify the gaps that we've got within that? So we basically came in to look at, well, if we have access to whatever information we want, now there's a separate problem of how do we get that information, but assuming we have it, what can we do with it? And that's really where this, I suppose, project came to be. It was looking at basically if we then bring on new investigators halfway through an investigation that's already underway, how do we get them up as possible? When we're doing that handover from the investigative side to the prosecution and then to the defence, how do we get them up to speed as quickly as possible? And basically just how do we minimise that loss of information along the way? Speaking to the investigators, one of the things that we really found early on was, as much as there are these modern case management systems and every investigator's got their own notebook, there's so much that's still retained mentally, and they've got this mind map of what's going on. And there is a little bit of a legislative reason, especially within policing, for why that is how it is, but we need to make sure that as much as possible that's actually pulled out and communicated to everyone else involved in the case.
Can it be done in live stream, or there's a bit of processing in the background?
Absolutely. So what we designed was basically a visualization to sit atop existing systems. So it's not a system in itself, it's just a tool to show you what you've got.
Is it virtual? Is it like a virtual 3D or 2D?
So it's 2D, but it's got 3D components. So you can pull in point cloud scans. Speaking to the investigators, they're doing more and more 3D scanning of crime scenes, or if there's an industrial accident, they're scanning that in. So the visualization itself is 2D. We can pull in 3D elements, and I suppose for some of the more greenfields elements of the project, we have been looking at a virtual reality version as well. But the commercialized version will be 2D. Okay,
I've got a million questions for you, James. I'm ex-homicide squad and also National Crime Authority as well. So I'm thinking organised crime sort of investigations, transnational organised crime, and then also homicide. Where are you pulling the data from? Is it just sort of machine learning and just pulling out all of those data points and just the keywords kind of sort of keyword mapping?
So it's effectively designed to sit atop the case management system or whatever data repositories that you've got. So it doesn't just have to be the one case management system, it can be other repositories. The way that it works is basically then to pull that in and try and process events that have taken place, etc. What we then do is basically try and create an understanding of what's gone. So for example, Bob shot Bill, we have an action that's taken place, we've got someone that instigated that, and then we've got the passive recipient of whatever occurred. Once we have an understanding of that, it means rather than just looking at basically paragraphs of text or pieces of information or photos, whatever it may be, we've got an understanding of, at a really basic level, what's actually gone on. What we tried to do early on was really remove a lot of the text-heavy representation that goes on for the investigations and the files that you guys are looking at. And what we found is, and I like to say that you have to have that Morgan Freeman voice. You can make the visualization as pretty as you want, but you have to say, and then he walked in the room, looked in the corner and saw whatever it may be. And without that Morgan Freeman voice, it's very, very hard to really provide the full context that you need. So you have to have that there at some level.
So
and
this is automated, right? So this is naturally creating a narrative tool. And how do you manage the length of that narrative?
So it can get very, very long. You mentioned your history before in terms of homicide. I think it was ACC. So obviously you can have these huge, huge cases going on. You can have drug cases that go on, multiple years.
We just had Operation Ironside, mate.
Yes, indeed. So definitely want to get the data sets for that.
Yeah.
One of the things that we do is basically, early on we wanted to say, look, which events are most important to the investigator? And they were very hesitant to even just put a flag as to, I think this is important, because that can be then disputed when it goes to the court of law. And this is where it starts to get differences between the different domains. But what we can then do is, depending on the domain, obviously if someone is shot, we can rank that as a high-level event. We go through and we try and give approximate values for the different types of events that have taken place in the story. And what we can then do is filter this 18 months down into basically, your 5-minute summary, your 10-minute summary. And that's actually designed that it can give you a little bit of the background, a little bit of where we're currently at, and a little bit about kind of where we are going in the future.
And I take it, can they pull out certain aspects of that to say, okay, within this time zone, we want to just pull out that and get a narrative on that?
Yeah, so you could drill further down. So effectively, you can kind of think of like a tree, and you can kind of walk as far down a branch as you want. Otherwise, you can say, look, I'm done with this now. I'll go look at the next branch and what the next storyline tells us. And that really came out of the project was a collaboration with DST, Defense Science Technology Group, and they looked at a lot, obviously, telling narratives and this communication within the defense domain. So we're closely with them to make sure that we have the understanding not just from the policing side, but from the defense and national security side.
So defense, you're applying it to a battle scenario?
So that's what they're looking at the moment. We've extended this into a couple of different domains, one of which was looking at applying for simulation, so effectively red on blue force simulation. If we've got this number of jets, frigates, whatever force mix you may have, if we run these simulations and we run it 1,000 times, 500,000 times, how can we start to understand actually what's going on across those simulations and trying to pull out and understand the decisive changes from one force configuration versus another one, and then try and make decisions based on that.
Do you keep the Morgan Freeman voice for the defence as well, or only for the police?
We do.
You've only got Morgan Freeman, have you? That's all you got?
We don't have the text-to-speech yet, but I'm keen to put it in.
Okay, well, there you go. So maybe that's a good question of where are you at with this? Is this a piece of research being developed, and you're now after the data sets, and is there AI being applied? This is going to learn on its own?
So the original project was basically just sitting on top of the existing repositories. It's moved forward in a couple of different areas. At the moment, the original IP is being commercialized primarily for government by Gen X Ventures. They're based out of Melbourne. But the project itself, and I suppose the philosophy, has moved forward in a couple of other projects, one of which was that simulation project I just mentioned for DST. And that's moved forward again with a Defence Innovation Partnership, which is a South Australian government grant that we've been looking at for the past year for that, again on force simulation and trying to understand that in greater detail. The narrative visualization approach, which is basically just trying to understand what we're going on within a narrative context. We've now got a couple of other projects, the biggest one being with BAE, or British Aerospace, as part of the Innovative Manufacturing CRC. So there's a lot going on in terms of people have this information and it's just making sense of it.
So you can apply it to sort of large manufacturing projects as well?
Absolutely. Everything in terms of asset management. What's the story of this individual bolt within this component, within this system, within this piece of machinery, or whatever it may be. And that becomes especially important, I think, for asset management, logistics. What's the story of this package? Where has it been? As humans, we're innately driven by the who, what, when, where, why. So it makes sense to try and understand the huge amounts of data that are being generated and collated within that narrative context. I think that's one of the big things for, you mentioned we're at the Australian Research Centre for Interactive and Virtual Environments, trying to figure out how we can basically generate these environments that really recreate everything that has gone on to date and help people understand that.
So basically it's a data science project, but then you are, as you say, narrating it, but this is just that narration. There's nothing visual to this. This is just simply...
No, sorry. By narration, I mean narrative just in terms of a story. So it is a visualization. The defense guys, the DST, actually have basically like a virtual news anchor. And this is something they had.
Am I out of a job, am I?
Project. You're almost out of a job. And that was really quite neat in that it would literally be like kind of watching the 6 p.m. news, but it would be your defense update about whatever was going on in the battlefield, or if the soldiers are about to head out to do whatever recon that they need to do, getting them up to speed. And that's where it could be, look, I need the quick 30-second summary, and that's what they get, or I need the 5-minute briefing, or I need the full depth exploration.
Okay. So again, applying it to a major crime or a major investigation, the boss wants to hear the daily briefing. He can just get his daily briefing whenever he wants.
So we were speaking to basically where you do the National Security Hotline reporting, and once a week they have all the big wigs come in, and everyone has to basically plead their case as to where they get the resources to investigate things for the next week. And they said that we've only got basically a couple of minutes per person to make our impact, but whatever questions that were asked, we need to be able to drill down and pull up that specific information. So even though we can have this 2-minute high-level summary, you can then got a touchscreen version or a mouse, you can then tap on it and drill down into the underlying information, or kind of get that extra information that they're wanting. Because obviously, if you've only got that short time frame, that's what you need to go for. If we're doing the onboarding of the new investigation, then we can go through every single little detail, license plate numbers, all of that. But we don't care about that for the 30-second summary.
Now, so I see defence, I see major crime, and most of, say, a crime management platform will keep all those keywords, pretty much everything. You can then start to do that search, and it will start to map it like analytical tools and the data wheels and the matching. So there's a lot of visualization in them already. Where would you say your key differentiation is from that? Is it the narrative side, putting it into a story?
Absolutely, the narrative
and maybe
side.
How do you do that? What's the secret sauce there?
So a lot of the systems that are out there have kind of the individual visualizations that you can pull up, whether that's a social network map or whatever it may be. I think the big thing is understanding and trying to piece everything together, and that's obviously a very hard challenge. And like I said, kind of not shying away from that Morgan Freeman, that you have to have that voice there. You have to have some kind of text to get that context, and not shying away from that. So it's then pulling in materials around that, and it's then just having an awareness and an understanding of the provenance of information. We know this because it came from here because Bob told us. So it's then having that whole understanding of where this information came from, what transformation it's gone under, and then how that impacts what you've got now. Just because we have a fact, that doesn't mean the fact is true. If we learned it from a dodgy drug dealer versus if we learned it from a Telstra customer report, we can then have different ratings of, I suppose, trust associated to that. So we need to then have an understanding that just because it is there in the story, it doesn't mean that we should necessarily trust or rely on it.
We haven't mentioned, we covered quite a bit on cybersecurity, and have you looked at applying this in a cybersecurity context, or a crisis context as well?
Absolutely. So we put in a grant, haven't heard back on that one yet, but we are looking in applying this basically in every domain out there. Cybersecurity is a big one. We're seeing this more and more, obviously, with the recent hacks in the US and in Australia, not just, but also in terms of the exfiltration of data as well. And I think that's only going to be a domain that's going to be growing in importance. Moving forward, also then looking at space. Obviously, we've got the Space Centre now that's set up in Adelaide as well. So there's a number of different domains where really understanding this information is absolutely critical. Obviously, there's common themes across that, but then there's also differentiations between the different domain applications.
Okay, so how is it applied? Is it a cloud-based platform, or is it what is it? And then how do you upload the data sets? And does it need any specific data sets in their format?
So at the moment, originally it was developed basically in a game engine. So because we come from interactive and virtual environments, we do a lot of our work in game engines. We want to do it in virtual reality, a web version. If we want a desktop version, we can generate that. Where the commercialization going is basically turning it into web version. So you can load up your browser, you can log into your workplace portal, and then you can fire it up from there. That can then either consist of loading in data via an upload from your desktop, or then potentially have that fed into whatever data silos you've got sitting behind that. So I suppose that's where the commercialization and the refinement really comes in terms of taking it from a research tool into actually something that fits existing workflows that are out there.
So again, it's in a single game engine.
It's just it started off in a game engine, but now it is literally just a web page that you log onto, and then you've got your visualization there. That data then can be fed from an upload from your desktop, or it can be then linked into your organization's repositories. Basically, when you give us data, what we go through is try and extract the locations, the entities, the timestamps, the events that have taken place, and that's what then feeds into it. Obviously, if you've got a case management system, if you are the AFP or if you are SAPOL, you are going to have a case management system that has large chunks of that information in there, but there's always going to be a lot more data that is unstructured than what we've got that's structured. So we have to try and pull as much as we can out, either as the core resource or a supplementary resource. It's not going to be the same as someone manually curating it by hand, but it's sure as hell better than having none of that information at all, easily accessible.
What are some of the limitations to this, do you think? I can see it from another crime-fighting tool, particularly on your case management and maybe operational management as well. What about for court? So there was mentioned here it's been used in, say, child protection. Do you see it getting to the jury as a tool?
I think so, absolutely. So we had a couple of different PhD students that were working on other facets of the project. One of them was looking purely at the jury and the courtroom scenario. We had another one that was actually looking at CCTV. So there are a couple of different prongs. I think the cases that we're getting put in the courtroom now are becoming more and more complex and more domain specific, and tech is becoming a bigger part of them. And I think we have juries that are just normal end users that don't have that. We need better tools to help communicate these cases, both for defense and the prosecution in the courtroom. You mentioned child protection. That is one of the big domains that we're looking at kind of straight out the gate, both in terms of the legal and the policing side for it, but even just when they go to place kids in homes, which foster carer is in the best spot to take care of this child? What's this child's history? Do they have a history of certain behaviors, or if they have these behaviors, do other kids have these behaviors, and why do they all have these behaviors? So it's then, I suppose, kind of starting to go down a little bit more of the mining thing of, if we are noticing something's off, how can we then jump back into the story of this kid for the past year, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and then we might find that other kids have had similar behavioral issues, and then have they all come out of the same foster care home? What's the story there? But there's a lot there of, this kid's been collected by child services today, we need to place him tonight, where are we going to put them? So
and you have to brief that case officer.
Yeah. So we need to have the ideal matching of the resources that we have to the information that we've got coming in. And then when we do actually drop that child off at that person's front door, that's the first time they've met them. So how do they get up to speed with the last, up to 18 years of this child's life to make sure they can support them the best way they can, as quickly as they possibly can?
How innovative is this, James, in terms of, are you hearing or seeing other narrative tools out there? Maybe, and what is the background to this type of research that's been occurring? I
think the narrative visualizations really only started kind of the last maybe 6 or 7 years, and really kind of hitting its stride in the last 3 or 4. It can come in many forms. I mean, if you look at comic books, that's a narrative visualization. You're visualizing the narrative there. So there's a number of different ways that you can do that. At news media, you've got more and more infographics. So if you read the New York Times, or even the Australian, we're seeing more and more interactive tools to actually explore.
Is that a good analogy in terms it turns into a large book into a comic that you can scan through?
At a high level, anything's kind of help you understand it. But you're seeing more and more for the news. They're having these little widgets. ABC is doing a lot of that. Kind of narrative visualization as well. And I think that's just showing the applications of this, but B, really just how it helps people understand the information, even if they don't have that technical background.
And just cutting out all the noise, basically. Cutting out the noise and getting to those key points.
Exactly. One of the other things that we found really interesting was we were speaking to the ATO about the tool, because obviously they were interested with the applications for it. And they said, look, we'll start doing an investigation because someone was avoiding taxes, but it turns out they're avoiding taxes because of motorcycle gangs, prostitutions, drugs, guns, whatever it may be. So we then pull in this other unit, then focuses on the motorcycle gangs, and someone else focuses on the drugs, someone else focuses on prostitution, whatever it may be. So one of the things that's really neat about the tool is we have an understanding of what the person that's using the tool is actually interested in. When we do that filtering down to the 5-minute summary or the 3-minute summary, it can actually focus and be tailored towards the kinds of events that person actually wants. And that way, if I'm doing a 5-minute briefing to a superior that has a background in motorcycle gangs, it's tailored to that versus the briefing to the superior that's focused on the tax and the financial side of it. Obviously, there's the overlap there, but there's a few different stories there within that overarching arc.
Look, it's fascinating. I'd like to see it. And maybe I'll just. It's not obviously Dr. James Walsh doing all this. He's also working with Dr. Andrew Cunningham and Professor Bruce Thomas there as well. And this is James. You're a postdoctoral researcher with University of South Australia STEM. How long have you been working on this?
So the project started 2014, 2015, and then that was collaborating heavily with, I suppose, the AFP. So we're working with AFP agents there, talking about their problems, and that's where this was heavily driven and, I suppose, tailored to their initial use case. But then moving out from there, obviously our collaboration with DST as part of the project, that then brought in the defence side of that. And then once we effectively had that prototype to shop around, then engaging the ATO and the other different government agencies, whether that's geospatial, whether that's actually the ADF, looking at how that can actually be applied to their specific domain.
And where are you now in terms of, are you heading to commercialisation, or you are a commercial? Well,
so
you're a day
we're not handling that ourselves. GenX Ventures are handling that, so they've acquired the IP from the research centre. We're still working with them to basically do that commercialisation and then further move forward with continued R&D in the different domains. So again, it's looking at, well, we've got this tool originally within the defence and national security space. How do we then customise that to the child protection domain? How do we customise that to the logistics and the asset management domain? And then what does that introduce? And effectively making sure that we can still have one tool, but it can then be that jack of all trades that we need for those different use cases.
Like a data narrative tool as a service, software as a service as a approach. Yeah, right.
I think. Sorry, you go.
I was going to go off topic. Go with yours.
So I was just going to say one more thing. You mentioned in terms of what's different for our system. One of the things that was really interesting that I didn't mention before was, I go back to the Lord of the Rings analogy, that a lot of the case management tools are very focused on the chronology, which makes sense. You need to understand that chronology. But in terms of getting people up to speed, it doesn't really work as effectively as actually focusing on Bob for a certain period of time and then focusing on Alice and whoever it may be. So if you watch The Lord of the Rings in chronological order, very hard to watch. You keep jumping between what all the different characters are doing. But if we just focus on certain elements for a certain, then we can get up to speed, gain that understanding, and then move on to someone else. I think that was one of the
context as well.
Exactly. One of the really big, I suppose, kind of points of differentiation between what we've got versus what's already included in the existing off-the-shelf tools.
Okay, interesting. And obviously that gaming engine gives you that power, but also the crunching of that data, and which is, again, it's just slightly different. Are you is this using high performance computing? What kind of computing power do you need in the background?
So at the moment it just runs on the standard desktop. The game engines really allow us to basically go in whichever way we want to go. If we want to go into a web version, which is what we've got now, we can do that. If we want a desktop, if we want a tablet, if we want a mobile, or if we want to go virtual reality. And like I said, we did actually explore that as part of that for a more geospatial focused version of it, and it really gives us that flexibility for whatever we want to do, that the whole system has been built up in a games platform that we can then translate into whatever we need to do. That is something that is obviously changing a little bit with the commercialization, that is becoming more of a web product. But for most of our R&D these days, we use game engines, either Unity or Unreal, and that gives us the flexibility to effectively kind of pivot to whatever direction we need. If we want to pull in something else, we do a lot of augmented reality as well. So you've got the HoloLens, you can then put the HoloLens on and see other information pop up in front of you as well. So it's all built from the ground up with that flexibility to go in whichever direction we need to. Sounds
friggin' awesome. I really like it. And I noticed we did a podcast, or Jane did a podcast, our Singapore correspondent, with Murdoch University using virtual reality for crime scene investigation, and then walking people through crime scenes in a virtual environment. So I think if you're already getting a narrative in a virtual environment and you're moving to other virtual environments to deep dive, that sounds like the future I always thought was coming. So it sounds like it's starting to arrive. James, the question I had for you, what's your background? What's your sort of domain of research and expertise? Where have you come from?
So my background was in user interfaces, visualization, and effectively just human-computer interaction. and looking at just how we can basically make that seamless, make that more natural. There's a lot that we do that we still do just because it's a learned response. Even though your iPhone feels incredibly simple to use, it's because there's still a lot of learned responses there. What we're looking to do, obviously, at the center is it's just about basically making interaction as natural as it possibly can be, whether that's with information, whether that's controlling systems for machinery, or the new submarines or the frigates, whatever it may be. Just helping simplify and make human-computer interaction much more natural.
Very nice. Okay, well, you're never going to run out of work. Well, not for a while anyway. But look, I do appreciate it, James. Final call to action. Are you? Is this just to get the word out there? What would be your call to action to finish off?
Call to action is, if you're interested in the work, please do reach out. Obviously, for myself at the university, Dr Andrew Cunningham, Professor Bruce Thomas. We are here to basically address your needs. We are here to work with industry to try and help you understand and address your problems. So if you do think this tool could be potentially usable, or a variation of this tool, or you've got a similar problem, please do reach out, because we are here to help in any way we possibly can.
Great, I love it. Look, thank you, Dr. James Walsh, Research Fellow from the Australian Research Centre for Interactive and Virtual Environments at the University of South Australia. Thank you very much, mate. I'll let you go. Enjoy your day. And this will be out as an edited version as well. But thanks, James.
No worries. Cheers.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.